Happy New Year. It's great to be back. And I know a lot of you are looking to kick off this year with a focus on faith,
Yes.
particularly when it comes to trusting God's plans for us.
Ah,
Pretty profound way to start the year, wouldn't you say?
absolutely.
We've got some great material to explore today,
Yeah.
including that powerful verse from Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11.
Okay.
For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. That's quite a promise. I'm really curious to hear your take on all this.
Sure.
You always have such insightful perspectives on faith and life.
Well, that verse certainly cuts to the heart of what it means to live with faith, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It acknowledges the uncertainty we all feel,
right.
that desire for a roadmap,
Yeah,
and then offers something even better,
okay.
a trust in a plan that's bigger than our own limited vision.
It's almost like saying, okay, I've got my goals, I got my resolutions, but what's the divine version of my year going to look like?
Right.
Right.
But how do we even begin to grasp a plan that might unfold
Yeah.
in ways we can't predict or even understand at times?
That's where the story of Joseph comes in.
Okay.
You know, the one where he's sold into slavery by his own brothers,
Yeah.
thrown in prison,
Right.
yet ultimately rises to power in Egypt.
I've heard that story so many times.
Yeah.
But honestly, it always felt a bit, I don't know, fantastical.
Yeah,
Like, okay, that's great for Joseph,
sure.
but how does that apply to my everyday struggles
Right.
with work deadlines and relationship drama?
Well, it's a fair point.
Yeah.
But look closer at Joseph's choices during those trials.
Yeah.
When he's falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, he could have lashed out, given into despair.
Right.
Instead, he maintains his integrity even in prison.
Mm.
He interprets dreams, earns trust,
Okay.
actions that prepared him for the role he'd eventually play
Oh, wow.
in saving Egypt from famine.
So it's not just about what happened to him,
Right.
but how he responded.
Even when things seemed hopeless,
Yeah.
almost like he was trusting that there was a reason
Yeah.
for his suffering, even though he couldn't see it at the time.
That's it.
Hmm.
What's fascinating is that he never claims to understand God's plan.
Okay.
He simply trusts.
Wow.
And that trust allows him to see opportunity in what others would perceive as defeat.
Right.
He doesn't just passively wait for rescue. He actively uses his gifts, even in the most difficult circumstances.
Okay, that actually makes the story way more relatable.
Yeah.
Less like a fairy tale and more like a blueprint for navigating tough times.
That's a good way to put it.
But how do we cultivate that level of trust? Especially when life feels like it's throwing us one curveball after another.
Right.
Is it as simple as just saying, I
Yeah.
trust you, God, and then magically feeling at peace?
No,
Because that's definitely not my experience.
of course not.
Okay.
It's a process,
Yeah.
and it's often messy and uncomfortable.
Right.
No one's claiming it's easy.
Yeah.
But I think that's where Jeremiah 29.11 offers us both comfort and challenge.
Comfort in knowing that God does have a plan, even if it's not the one we'd initially envisioned.
Right.
And a challenge to surrender our own limited perspective.
Yeah.
And embrace that greater vision.
You got it.
And surrendering control.
Yeah,
Well, that's usually the hardest part, isn't it?
it is.
We're so attached to our plans, our timelines, our perceived needs.
Right.
But what if letting go of that tight grip actually opens us up to something far more extraordinary than we could have ever imagined?
Now you're talking.
Okay, that's where it gets really interesting to me, because surrender sounds lovely in theory,
Sure.
but in practice, it can feel like giving up, admitting defeat.
Mm.
How do we practically differentiate between surrender
Yeah.
and just throwing in the towel when things get tough?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And one we should explore further.
Okay.
Let's dive into the practicalities of surrender, the next part of our deep dive.
I'm ready when you are. Welcome back to our deep dive on trusting God's plans. I'm already feeling challenged by this whole idea
Oh,
of
yeah.
surrendering our neatly laid out plans
Yeah.
to something larger.
Right.
We left off talking about the story of Joseph, who went from prisoner to prime minister. Talk about a career change
Yeah.
nobody saw coming.
Right.
It highlights how what we might see as a setback could actually be setting us up for something bigger, right?
Absolutely.
But as you pointed out, the idea of surrender
Yeah.
can feel a bit like giving up.
I can see that.
But here's the key difference.
Okay.
Surrender isn't about passivity.
Right.
It's about actively aligning our will with God's,
Okay.
which requires a whole lot of trust.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it like this. You're on a road trip.
Okay.
But instead of gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles,
Yeah.
you hand it over to someone who knows the terrain better than you.
Right.
You're still on the journey,
Yeah.
but you're allowing yourself to be guided.
I like that analogy.
Okay, I like the road trip analogy too.
Yeah.
It feels less like I'm losing control.
Yeah.
And more like I'm choosing to trust a more experienced navigator.
Exactly.
But that still doesn't answer the how question for me.
Okay.
How do we actually do this surrender thing in real life?
Yeah.
I mean, does it mean we just sit around waiting for divine inspiration to strike?
Not quite.
Okay.
Remember what we discussed about Joseph?
Yeah.
He didn't just sit in prison hoping for a miracle.
Right.
He actively used his gifts to interpret dreams, to build relationships.
Okay.
That's a crucial aspect of surrender.
Okay.
Being open to the opportunities that come our way,
Yeah.
even if they don't look like what we expected.
Right.
It's about recognizing that God often works through our actions, not just by dropping solutions out of the sky.
So it's about staying engaged even when things feel uncertain.
Yes.
It's not just sitting back and hoping for the best,
No.
but taking steps forward even if they're baby steps.
Exactly. And those steps might involve seeking wise counsel,
Oh, okay.
just like Joseph did with Pharaoh's dreams, surrounding ourselves with people
Yeah.
who can offer different perspectives,
Okay.
who challenge our assumptions, can help us discern the path forward.
Yeah.
It's amazing how a conversation with a trusted mentor or friend
Right.
can suddenly shed light on a situation
Yeah.
that felt completely dark before.
It's almost like having more headlights on the road trip,
Right.
illuminating the path ahead more clearly.
Yes.
So actively seeking guidance from others is a form of surrender too.
Precisely.
Okay.
It's acknowledging that we don't have all the answers
Right.
and being open to the wisdom of others. Remember, surrendering to God doesn't mean isolating ourselves.
Right.
It's often in community that we find the clarity and support we need to navigate those tricky turns on the road of life.
Okay. I'm starting to see how surrender is much more active
Yeah,
and engaging than I initially thought.
it really is.
But let's get even more specific. Say you're at a crossroads, facing a major life decision,
Right.
a new job offer, a relationship challenge, a health scare.
Okay.
How can we practically apply this idea of surrender?
Yeah.
In those high-pressure moments, where do we even begin?
It all starts with acknowledging our limitations
Okay.
and coming before God with humility. That means letting go of the need to have everything figured out
Right.
and admitting we need guidance.
So step one is simply admitting, okay, God, I'm kind of lost here. I need help.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's like pressing the recalculate button on that GPS system.
Yeah.
But instead of blindly following the next instruction, we need to engage in a deeper conversation through prayer,
Yeah.
through reflection, through being open to the whispers of intuition and wisdom.
It sounds like prayer is crucial in this process of surrender.
It is.
But not just the quick bless my food kind of prayer, right?
Absolutely. It's about setting aside time for intentional conversation with God, pouring out your heart, expressing your fears and hopes,
Yeah.
honestly sharing your struggles.
Right.
Imagine having coffee with a dear friend
Okay.
and confiding in them about everything that's weighing on your mind.
Right.
That's the kind of intimate connection
Yeah.
we need to cultivate with God.
That makes prayer feel much more accessible and relatable,
Yeah.
less like a formal ritual, and more like a heartfelt conversation.
I agree.
But what happens when the answers don't come
Right.
as quickly or as clearly as we'd like?
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of us get stuck,
I agree.
feeling like we're talking to a brick wall.
Yeah.
What do you say to
Yeah.
those who are struggling to hear God's voice or guidance?
First, I'd reassure them that they're not alone in that struggle.
Okay.
It's important to remember that God communicates in various ways, through a sense of peace, a sudden insight,
Yeah.
even through the words of a friend or a passage in Scripture. And sometimes the answer is simply not yet. Maybe we need more time to process,
Okay.
to grow, to learn before the path becomes clear.
So it's about trusting that the silence doesn't equal absence,
Yes.
that God is still working,
Exactly.
even when we don't feel it or understand it.
That's it.
And that brings us back to trust,
Yeah,
the very foundation of surrender.
it is.
It's about believing that even when we can't see the full picture,
Yeah,
even when things feel confusing or painful,
right.
God is still weaving a tapestry of goodness and purpose in our lives.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've talked about prayer, seeking wise counsel,
Right.
but Are there other practical tools or practices that can help us cultivate that trust
Yeah.
and deepen our connection with God, especially in those moments when fear and doubt start creeping in?
That's the question, isn't it? It's in those daily moments,
Yeah.
that our faith is truly tested and refined.
Right.
It's not just about the grand gestures. It's about cultivating a constant connection with God.
So true.
One practice that's been incredibly helpful for me is journaling.
Journaling. Okay, I'll admit, I've always thought of journaling as more of a self-care thing.
Yeah.
A way to process emotions.
Mm-hmm.
How does that tie into trusting God's plans?
Well, it's about bringing those emotions, those doubts, those hopes,
Yes.
directly to God on the page. Think of it as a written conversation with Him, a space to be completely honest. You can pour out your anxieties, your frustrations,
Right.
but also celebrate your victories and acknowledge the ways you see God working in your life.
So it's not just venting or wishful thinking.
No.
It's about actively engaging with our faith.
Yes.
Noticing the patterns, maybe even spotting those,
Right.
God winks we might otherwise miss.
Exactly. And it's amazing how patterns emerge when you start paying attention.
Yeah.
You begin to see how past challenges led to growth.
Right.
How prayers were answered in unexpected ways.
Okay.
It strengthens your trust because you have tangible evidence of God's presence and faithfulness in your own life.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's like building a case file
Right.
for trusting God, reminding ourselves of his track record, so to speak.
I like that.
What about when we're bombarded with negative news
Yeah.
or surrounded by people who don't share our faith?
That's a real challenge
Always.
in today's world, isn't it? It's like trying to cultivate a delicate flower in a harsh climate. That's where being intentional about what we feed our minds and souls becomes crucial. Just as we nourish our bodies with healthy food,
Right.
we need to nourish our spirits with things that uplift and inspire.
So being mindful of the music we listen to,
Yes.
the books we read, the company we keep, surrounding ourselves with things that point us back to truth and hope.
Precisely. And that doesn't mean living in a bubble,
Right.
but it does mean making conscious choices about what we allow into our mental and emotional space. Think of it like building a strong foundation.
Yeah.
The more solid that foundation is, the better we're able to weather the storms.
I love that analogy. It's not about denying the existence of the storms,
Right.
but about equipping ourselves to withstand them.
Exactly.
This has been such an insightful conversation.
Well, thank you.
And I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for approaching this new year with faith and trust.
Good.
Any final words of wisdom as we wrap up this deep dive?
Remember that verse we started with from Jeremiah?
Yeah.
For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in a future.
Powerful.
Those are just empty words. They're a promise.
Right.
And while the path might not always be clear,
Right.
and the journey might have its share of bumps along the way,
Yeah.
we can walk forward with confidence, knowing that we're not alone.
It's like we've been given a compass and a map, but the real adventure lies in discovering how the journey unfolds.
That's a great way to put it.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights. This has been an incredible start to the new year.
It's been my pleasure. Wishing you a year filled with faith, hope, and the courage to surrender to the beautiful plans God has in store for you.
And to you, dear listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. May you step into this new year with a renewed sense of trust and a heart open to the amazing possibilities that await. Until next time, keep exploring, keep seeking, and keep the faith.